invited both Mr. Housefather and Mr. Zuberi onto the show today. Mr. Zuberi is in committee this evening. Hopefully he'll join us tomorrow. Mr. Housefather joins me now, however, live in studio. Hi, Mr. Housefather. Good to have you here. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me, Vassy.
I wanted to start off on before we get to the motion, just your own experience living through the last month and how you would characterize kind of what the Prime Minister is talking about, this rise in anti-Semitism. What has it meant to you?
I mean, I think like many and the vast majority of Jewish Canadians, I very much have an attachment to Israel, our biblical homeland. Most of us have either family members or friends or close connections to Israel. And watching the attack of October the 7th, where the terrorist group Hamas killed over 1,400 innocent men, women, and children, took 200 or more hostages, tortured people, raped, it was horrible. But what was more horrible for us was the weeks that followed, where the worst attack against Jews since the Holocaust translated into an increase in anti-Semitism that I've never seen before, of epic proportions in Canada and across the Western world. And so talking to one another, we're scared, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're angry. We have every type of emotion.
Are you surprised? And I ask that because a number of Jewish people I know, around my age group have not really, and I don't mean this in a naive way, but haven't really experienced anti-Semitism during their childhood or when they've been growing up. And they're confronting it in such a drastic way right now. Is that your experience as well?
That's exactly my experience. I grew up in Montreal. I never confronted anti-Semitism as a kid, never in university, in my professional life, hardly at all. And suddenly, over the last few years, we've seen an increase in anti-Semitism dramatically increasing on social media. The number of incidents each year has increased, but the drastic increase of the last several weeks is something that I've never seen. I had a Jewish war veteran, a veteran of the Canadian Forces in the Second World War, had to have been in his late 90s, came up to me at a rally and said he's seen nothing like this in Montreal since the 1930s, when Adrien Arcand was marching in the streets with the fascists. And that's a man in his 90s who's really lived a very long life in one city. It's shocking.
So what was the impetus before bringing this, to bring this motion before the House? I should say both of those motions were adopted unanimously or given unanimous consent. Why did you want to put that statement before the House?
So I think there are two different issues. One of them is what's happening in the Middle East, and the second thing is anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of hate increasing in Canada. So I want to say that they're not the same. The motion was because I wanted to make sure that the House articulated a strong support for Israel after Israel was attacked by a terrorist organization. And last week, as the chair of the Canada-Israel Friendship Group, we brought families of the hostages, including Canadian families, to the House of Commons. We met with MPs and senators from all parties, and I promised them that I would go to the House and propose to the House that we demand that the hostages be unconditionally and immediately released. And I think that really is a precursor to anything really significant happening. If anybody wants Israel to change its current approach to the situation with Hamas, those hostages have to be released.
How is that conversation, I guess, playing out in the House of Commons from where you sit? There are MPs from different parties who express different points of view. And you will know as well as anyone, there are people in your own party, members of parliament, who do think that a ceasefire would be the most important thing. I know why you're opposed to one, and you kind of just outlined to a certain degree at this point. But how is that conversation playing out? You had mentioned a few weeks ago, I think I remember you stopping and saying to reporters that it was respectful and there was still room for that conversation. Is there still?
They're difficult conversations, and I think they have to happen across Canadian society, because if we don't talk to one another and understand what is making each other fearful, then we're never going to get past this. And I say this from the perspective that I don't think we're ever going to agree, some of us, on the events in the Middle East. I'm never going to not offer unconditional support to Israel. I'm never going to not say that Israel has a right to defend itself against a terrorist organization that attacked its civilians, that's built tunnels under Gaza, that is firing rockets into Israel from, because Israel's gone through a shock and they need to respond. But I also sympathize with the civilians in Gaza. I also believe that a humanitarian pause is realistic. And there's places we can find common ground, but where we all can find common ground is that we don't want the events of the Middle East, the hatred that happens in the Middle East, to come to Canada. It shouldn't affect our Jewish community. It shouldn't affect our Muslim community, our Palestinian community, our Christian community, or any other community. And therefore, we need to at least understand with one another that we cannot allow those events in the Middle East to come to Canada. And that means that we all have to say and all have to recognize that demonstrations where people are calling for the genocide or the killing or the torture or inhumane acts to be done to any identifiable group is not acceptable. Demonstrations outside Jewish institutions are not acceptable. And I think that is one of the things where a line has been crossed, and we need to pull it back here in Canada.
Do you think there is an appropriate level of commitment to doing that in a bipartisan nature in Parliament right now?
I can only speak for where I see the Liberal caucus. We have a very diverse caucus, a group of people that may think very differently about the events in the Middle East, but I think we all recognize that things in Canada need to be toned down, that people need to get along, and that no group should have to feel insecure in our country, in our own homes. And I think there we have a real consensus. And Jewish and Muslim MPs have met together on several occasions to try to work out these gaps in what we think. And again, I think we'll have to agree to disagree about where things are in the Middle East, but we don't have to disagree about home.
Do you continue to meet?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's a meeting tomorrow in Karina Gould's office. And I think it's, as our House leader, Karina, showed great leadership in bringing together these groups. And I think we're all committed to that because, again, where we disagree on foreign policy, and I may have disagreements with Liberals on a lot of other things too sometimes, right? We're not all monolithic in one party, and people seem to forget about that. I do believe that in the issue of Canada, that there should be no hate in Canada. No group should be made to feel the way the Jewish community has been made to feel, or many in the Muslim community have been made to feel in the last month. We all agree, and we need to stop that.
Okay, Mr. Housefather, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time this evening very much.
Thank you always for having me.